Can we just talk about some of the good stuff? Can we just take, 45 minutes, one episode, and talk about some good stuff? Because there's a lot of bad stuff. And I'm doing a pretty good job of being diligent about not ranting about the bad stuff. And on a certain level, that feels like a dereliction of duty. But on the other hand, I am trying to be an escape from some of the bad stuff on this show. Because Lord knows the bad stuff is everywhere else. Anywhere you go on socials, anywhere you get your news, you will get clobbered over the head, inundated with stuff that will make you as nuts as it makes me. I don't think it's all that helpful for me to talk about it on this program, although I'd probably get a lot more downloads if I did. But I'm sticking to principle here. And so, can we just take this time to talk about some of the good stuff? Because it's the Tuesday morning after, kids. It's the Tuesday morning after, and I am still basking in a warm glow after not only your Canadien de Montréal winning Game 7 in overtime last night in Buffalo. Not just that, yesterday afternoon as an appetizer, Arsenal defeated Burnley 1-0, which leaves them with one hand on the Premier League trophy, one win away from winning the Premier League for the first time in 22 friggin' years. In fact, I'm recording this on Tuesday. If results later today go our way, by the time you download this episode on Wednesday morning, Arsenal may already be Premier League champions for the first time in 22 friggin' years. Heady stuff, man. And at times like these, you gotta hold on to what sustains you. And I don't know what's sustaining you. I hope something is. Maybe this podcast is. I hope something is. Right now, the sports, at least in part, are sustaining me. And so this week, I've got some podcast updating to give you. I got some housekeeping to do. I've got some very cool new music to talk about. I've got some stories to tell, and we're going to try to keep it light, okay? And so I shall attempt to wax semi-eloquent about all that stuff after we do the thing. My life is beginning to resemble that network sign-off video that I like to talk so much about on this program. If you have not heard those episodes, or if you're too young to remember, and welcome if you are, back in the day, your television networks, at least in Canada, did not run 24/7. All right, at the end of the day, the network would sign off, and then for whatever it was, 6 or 8 hours, I don't know, you'd get just the colored bars on your screen. We end our broadcast day, but they would end it with a playing of the national anthem over a video montage of just Canadiana. And I have such nostalgia for that. I don't even know why. I've said before on this program that I get nostalgic for eras I didn't even experience. I did experience that, and there's something, I don't know what, about that old O Canada video montage that used to run in the 70s and 80s. I think about it, you can find it on YouTube. There are a couple of different ones. Once in a while, I'll watch one, and I will just be able to picture a different time, a time I experienced, and maybe I have a rosy glow about that, maybe rose-colored 2020 hindsight. I don't know. But there's something about that really takes me back, and I like it. And I find myself lately actually living it because it was scenes of Canadiana. So a few weeks ago, I'm in Niagara Falls. I'm standing looking at Horseshoe Falls, and I'm like, well, that's like the first image. Niagara Falls. It doesn't get any more symbolically Canadian than that. I'm standing at the falls. Then a couple weeks after that, I'm walking through Queen West, Toronto. And that's another sort of visual they would give you. They give you rural, they'd give you urban, but there would be a shot of Toronto, and sometimes it would be the skyscrapers. Sometimes it would just be a neighborhood in the city. And Queen West, that whole arts district, that was a big one. So I find myself experiencing that Canadiana. And then, just last weekend, I found myself in our nation's capital. I was in Ottawa, I was in Ottawa for a wedding. And don't weddings just give you hope? In this time that can feel so hopeless, in this time when it feels as though the darkness, the forces of darkness and oppression seem to be winning, for two young people to pledge themselves to a future, for two young people to say to each other, I choose you, and commit to a future, commit presumably to a family, commit to years together. Doesn't it just fill you with optimism, that eternal optimism of youth? Have you lost it? Have you lost the eternal optimism of youth now that you, probably like me, are middle-aged? I want you to resist the temptation to become cynical. I want you to resist the temptation to become curmudgeonly. And a wedding is a great place to do that. I attended the wedding of Andrea to Chandler. Chandler being one of the sons of my late best friend Clugger. And what an honor it was to be invited to that wedding. And it puts time into perspective for you. For I recall the day upon which Clugger called me up and said, we're having a baby. And I also recall the day a few weeks later upon which he called and said, it's twins. And then, whatever it is, 28 years later, to be sitting at the wedding of one of those twins really puts time in perspective for you. And then I took a photograph with the twins, and I'm way older than them. Now, I've said before on the program, I have this weird idea that you don't age mentally past age 32. Like in my mind, I'm still 32. Like when I go to pickleball and I see a bunch of late 20-somethings, early 30-somethings on the court, I'm like, yeah, that's where I fit. That's not where I fit. And thank God for 50-plus tournaments, because I do well enough in 50-plus tournaments because I'm the young guy. I watch those 30-somethings, and once in a while I find myself on the court with them, and then I realize very quickly, in a visceral way, that I'm not 32 anymore, but in my mind, I still feel as though I am. Then I see a photograph of myself with the twins, now 28-ish, and it's like, oh yeah, I could be their dad. Puts time in perspective, but I don't want you to become cynical about that. There's a weird temptation. It's almost like a conditioning, I think, when you get to your 50s, 40s, 50s, that all of a sudden you have to adopt this weird kind of middle-aged, upper middle-aged, adult kind of cynicism, or you have to quell this kind of enthusiasm for life. It's weird. And I think we've just kind of adopted this from a cultural representation of curmudgeonly old grandfathers or grumpy dads or whatever. It's like, it doesn't have to be that way. And I understand the temptation. I mean, I don't exactly sense time running out, but I can see it from here. I mean, we are of the age where our parents are beginning to go, both of mine in the last 5 years. And you begin to see mortality in more of an upfront kind of way. And so I can understand developing kind of a sense of fear, or kind of a sense of regret that maybe things haven't gone the way you hoped, or a sense of disappointment that time seems to be running out. And one of the reactions you can have to that is to become cynical and bitter. And I would like me to resist that and say, okay, we've come this far and here we are. And then you do reach a certain age where you realize it's a privilege, because I know people in their 50s who are not with us anymore. It's a privilege to get old. That didn't make a lot of sense to me until I started getting older. And it's like, well, yeah, you're damn right. And it can feel as though the world is a dark place. And I understand the thought that maybe you don't want to be in it anymore. I get that. But here you are, and there's still an opportunity to make the very best of it. And there is still an opportunity to live whatever dreams that you haven't. I saw somebody on Threads saying, my kid is becoming interested in the drums. He's 4. And I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and she said she wanted to play the drums when she was a kid, but her parents said that was for boys, not girls. And now she's middle-aged, and I'm like, tell her to start. Begin now. There is still opportunity. As long as Billy Connolly would say, as long as your arse looks south, you're still standing. You've still got this opportunity. And so if you find yourself in cynicism, go to a young person's wedding. Go to a young person's wedding and just bask in the hope. Bask in the faith that those people are putting into not just their future together, but a future more generally. It can feel as though there won't be one. There will. And it can be great. And then you watch all the young people at the head table who are just celebrating. And then you're watching them dancing. And it's like, it's easy to have this cynicism like, yeah, you kids have no idea what's coming. But that doesn't have to be their experience. And you watch them in that moment on that night, and you just see the hope they have. You see the faith they have. You see the optimism they have for the future. And it takes a very cynical person indeed not to be moved by that. And so it was my honor to attend that wedding, and it provided a bit of boost to me, just to remember being that age too, and having my own faith in a future. You don't get married unless you think there's going to be a future, and it's going to be a future that's great. And so I say congratulations to them, and I say thank you again for the invitation. My pal Clugger obviously couldn't be there, at least physically. Spiritually, maybe a different thing. And it was my honor to kind of be there. I don't know. Not as a stand-in for him, absolutely not. But as a person connected to that part of their family. I'm not articulating that well. It was an honor to be invited. And it was a shot in the arm. It was a shot in the heart. And you're to blame. Because you give love a bad... No, that's not it. It was just gave me a warm feeling to be there, even though bugs ate me for brunch. And I got loads of bug bites on me and worth every one of them. But I was in Ottawa, and so I had some time. I had arranged a few social engagements, 2 of which fell apart on me, which gave me some free time. And I thought, what are you going to do in Ottawa when you've got a few hours of free time? I'm going to go to the Canadian War Museum. That's what I'm going to do. And if you've not been and you are a history person, if you find yourself proximal to Ottawa, go to the Canadian War Museum. It's fantastic. I will say one thing. All right. And this is just a personal thing. Likely will not apply to you. But one of the reasons I wanted to go is because one of my favorite paintings until recently was displayed there. Now, if you've been listening for any length of time, that I am a history person, that the First World War is my historical hobby horse. And at a certain point in time, I became quite fascinated by Canadian war art. Now, it happened during the First World War that the Canadian government created a commission that was the war art program, the Beaverbrook War Art Program. And so they hired a whole bunch of cats, including a bunch of group of 7 painters, to go to Europe. They gave some of them commissions. They went to Europe to paint the war. At that time, photography existed. There was some suspicion about photography, and they thought artists would give a more accurate, perhaps, description of what was happening over there. And it's a really fascinating thing. Point being, they sent a bunch of artists over there to just be in the war and to paint what they saw and to bring that record back to Canada in the Beaverbrook collection. And it's really interesting because a lot of what you see, especially early on in the war, not just from Canadian artists, but from artists of all stripes, is kind of this heroic death and glory stuff. So you see these big canvases with big battles happening and a wounded officer in the middle urging his men forward. This kind of death and glory stuff. And that was very much the beginning of the war. You know, they all marched off very willingly into this conflict, wanted to get there as fast as they can, thought it would be over by Christmas, didn't want to miss it. A lot of patriotic fervor went into launching the First World War. None of those people, with a couple of exceptions, had any idea what they were getting themselves into. They had no idea the horror that they were about to find themselves embroiled in. And I'm a student of that war, and I can only speak academically about that horror. I've put myself there in my mind. The Canadian War Museum helps you because there are a couple of exhibits where you find yourself in a trench system looking around, or you find yourself on a duckboard surveying the Passchendaele battle landscape, the Passchendaele battlefield. And if you use your imagination, I'm very good at that, you can put yourself there. When I walked through the trench system at Beaumont-Hamel, outside of Arras, France, where on the morning of July 1st, 1916, the Battle of the Somme, the Newfoundland Regiment was more or less entirely wiped out in the space of a morning. Something to the effect of 800 soldiers went over the top, around 200 were left for roll call the next day. I stood at the danger tree where they gathered and were eaten alive by machine gun fire. You can be in the battlefield and you can place yourself there if you use your imagination. But these people marching off to war, in Canada's case in 1915, had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And the paintings, especially from the early part, depict this death and glory stuff. But by the end of the war, you see a lot more cynicism in the art, in everybody's art. If you go look at First World War art, Otto Dix, the painter, really, it becomes quite scary, actually. Like, it becomes almost like Alien, you know, because there will be these paintings of people in gas masks, just an army of people in gas masks. They look like aliens coming at you in the darkness, you know. And there's some really poignant and even scary stuff that got produced, particularly later in the war. But you see the tone change from death and glory into what on earth have we done? And one of my favorite illustrations, quite literally, of that idea is the painting by the Group of Seven painter Frederick Varley called For What? For What? And it is a painting just of any muddy, dark, gray, brown First World War battlefield you would like to imagine. And there's a dude there kind of resting on his shovel, soldier, and a wagon with two bodies just kind of thrown into it. Not glorifying anything, no glory, no heroism, just more dead people in a destroyed landscape. And the painting is called For What? That's where we got to by the end. What did we do this for? The answer is nothing. They did it for nothing. And it's such a poignant statement. It's a huge canvas, too, if you ever see it. Such a poignant statement and such a reflection of where the attitude went from 1914 to 1918. It was on display at the Canadian War Museum. So you walk into the museum and there's a few exhibits. You kind of wind your way through the museum and it's chronological. So it starts in like the 1500s and it goes back to wars among native peoples and then the French and English and the Battle of Plains of Abraham and the 7 Years' War and all that stuff up to the American Revolution, the War of 1812. It goes chronologically through it all. And then you get to First World War, which is where things get really hot. And they have a couple of fantastic exhibits. But it used to be that you walked through and you turned a corner, and then there was, for what? The actual canvas by Varley. And I remember standing in front of it, I don't know, 15 years ago probably, and just being stunned because it's my favorite war painting, one of them anyways. And I had seen zillions of pictures of it. I'd thought about it, learned a bit about it. And then to be standing in front of it was really poignant, really profound. To see the actual Varley's actual brush strokes. Pretty intense, man. And I was very excited to go back and see it again because it's been a while since I visited that painting. I got to the War Museum and I went inside and I went through everything and I got to the First World War area and no Varley. No Varley. There were a couple other famous war pieces of war art that are on display there. Some of which are the death and glory stuff. Some of which are much more dark, much deeper reflections upon all of this. Really interesting stuff. And I think pieces from the Beaverbrook display, from the Beaverbrook program, the war art thing was run by a cat called Lord Beaverbrook. That's why it's called that. And we still had lords in those days. And I think a lot of those pieces are under wraps somewhere. A lot of them are in galleries. A lot of them are in government offices. And it was Varley. It was A.Y. Jackson. It was a lot of group painters who painted some really compelling stuff. And I was disappointed that Varley's For What was not on display. And I don't know where it went. Maybe it's rented out someplace. I don't know. But a profound painting. And I'm glad that I got to see it at one point in my life. Wished I could have seen it again. Disappointing, but that's okay. But you walk through and they just have, it's such a great museum. Such a great museum. They've got Billy Bishop's propeller in there. Billy Bishop of Owen Sound, my hometown. The great hero of Owen Sound. And all sorts of really, really compelling stuff. And I have this thing where history affects me in ways that it doesn't affect normal people. So I'm walking through the early exhibit and they're talking about battles between First Nations back in the day, and they've got weapons. They got axes that are 600 years old that were used by native warriors. And I can just begin to contemplate that piece and be like, what is the history? What is the story? When was it made? Who made it? Where has it been? What has it done? And the same thing happens for all the artifacts that I run across, whatever they are. It's like all of these are not just artifacts. They are stories. It's like, what is the history of that weapon? What is the history of that uniform that's on display over there? What is all of the history? And it just kind of blows me up, you know? And I begin to have all this weird stuff happening. And then you walk through the Second World War exhibit, Hitler's limousine. They have Hitler's limousine. They have tanks. They have personnel carriers. They have all of this real stuff. And it's all on display, and it's fantastic. It's a fantastic museum. You can go through it in a couple hours. It's fine. You can take a lot longer if you want to, into the Korean War, the Cold War, more modern stuff, Afghanistan, etc. Really, really fascinating. Really, really terrific museum. And then in the bottom, two really, really fantastic things. Two really, really fantastic galleries. One is a gallery of plaster casts made by Walter Allward of the statues that would appear on the Vimy Memorial. Walter Allward was commissioned to design the Vimy Memorial at Vimy Ridge in France, where I've been, and it is stunning. The most magnificent monument on the Western Front. Fantastic. If you've seen photos, if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. Well, in the basement of the Canadian War Museum are the plaster casts that he created that would be the models for the actual sculptures on the memorial, which are huge at the memorial, but these casts are more life-size kind of. Really fantastic. So you just get to walk around and look at the models for what would become the statues on the Vimy Memorial. And then you walk into the next gallery, which is just weapons. Just a sea of tanks and field guns and personnel carriers and jeeps and a submarine, all on display on the lower level of the gallery. Amazing stuff. Tiger tanks, Panzers, Sherman tanks, stuff that's famous. And then you look at them and you're like, tanks are huge. I mean, the original tanks for the First World War, why are they called tanks, by the way? Well, they were developing this weapon. How much history do we want to do here? First World War, the problem was defense was stronger than offense, right? Everybody was dug into trench systems. They were all fortified. And the only way they had of overtaking the enemy's trench system was basically to charge face first into it. And they tried different stuff like bombing the enemy trenches for a week. That's what they did on the Somme. And then charging face first into enemy fire, which resulted in millions of deaths. It's like, we need a way to get past the wire and to get into the enemy trench system without getting killed. And so one of the things they came up with was this idea of basically a big rolling metal box where you could just roll right over top of the barbed wire, and the tanks were long enough that they would span the length of the width of the trench. Because if it was too short, you just get to the edge of the trench and then you'd fall in. Well, these ones would span the width, right? And so they were developing these enormous, literally the size of a school bus, rolling vehicles. And they advanced, I think, at top speed at little more than the pace of a walking man. These enormous, heavy, cumbersome, awful things. They were one solution to the problem of how do we get past the barbed wire into the enemy trench system. They called them tanks, as far as I can remember, to throw off the enemy who might have been picking up wire messages, listening in. It's like, we'll call them something innocuous like a tank. And they'd be like, oh, no idea what tank means, and no idea what they're talking about. They couldn't say over the airwaves, armored personnel carriers to go over barbed wire. Tanks. I don't know what tanks is. They're talking about something called tanks. That's why they're called tanks, as far as I know. Anyways, the original ones were enormous, and so are the modern ones. Like, you stand there and you're like, it doesn't register until you're standing in front of a tank how huge it is. And terrifying. And it's pretty wild to just walk through and see all of these machines. See the field guns. See all of this weaponry. And on a certain level, it's horrendous. I understand that our innovation and capacity for creating killing machines is awful, and the fact that we as human beings feel the need to have them is awful. But for a history person to go stand in front of a Sherman tank or a Panzer is pretty interesting and pretty potent. And if you can keep in the back of your mind what these machines are for and when and why and how they were used, that's pretty damn sobering. And the fact that certain elements of the global population seem so keen to keep doing that sort of stuff is infuriating and friggin' sad. But let's not get political here. Canadian War Museum, 100% do recommend. It's a really, really interesting place. And that's pretty Canadiana, but you don't get that on the sign-off reel with the national anthem. What you do get is the Parliament buildings. Now, I did not walk up. The Canadian War Museum's like you can see the Parliament buildings from the museum. It's just down the street. But a 20-minute walk, didn't really have it in me at the time. I had been driving for 7 hours to get there. My back was not great. It's like, I'm not going to walk up to the Parliament buildings. But I could see them, and I'm coupling that with Niagara Falls, Toronto, Parliament buildings. It's like, if I visit the Halifax Pier and maybe the Rockies, I've covered it. I've covered the entire Canadiana reel. Pretty cool, right? So I don't know. It's just circumstance. I find myself in circumstance. And there's still a lot to be enjoyed and celebrated about this country. I know it feels threatening right now, as it should. For good reason it feels threatening right now. But as I record this, the sun is shining, and I've been to these places just in Ontario that remind me that we have here a pretty good place. Not perfect, but there's still a lot to appreciate here. And summer is a great time to appreciate it, by the way. And this is not a marketing episode sponsored by Tourism Canada. But I find it interesting that I seem to be living the end of broadcast reel these days, which is kind of fun, actually. Had a good time in Ottawa. Great to see the eternal optimism of youth, and I wish them all the best. And I want you, faithful listener who's maybe a little bit older than that, to just hold on to a shred of that optimism if you can. Just hold on to a shred of hope and faith in the future. It's nice to be reminded. Go to a wedding, young people, get reminded about what it's like to have faith in the future, and try not to be cynical about what their future might be. Just because yours didn't work out doesn't mean theirs won't work out. Hold on to a little bit of optimism. That's more than I intended to say. I didn't expect to do a bunch of war history. But that's the way it goes on these episodes sometimes, kids. These are, for the most part, a free-for-all. Couple housekeeping things. I have made the decision to launch a Substack. If you don't know what Substack is, it is a blogging platform. You can also podcast from Substack. I have two primary benefits of Substack for my purposes. It helps me create an email list. And so I have now launched an email list via Substack, and I can now contact you directly if you sign up for free for my Substack, which is semieloquentpodcast.substack.com. Go there. It will give you the option to put in your email address and sign up. And if you do that, I would greatly appreciate it, because then I can talk to you directly. I can send, and I will do and have been, every week a newsletter connected to that week's episode, where I'll be able to put in some of the music I talked about, where I'll give you updates, whatever. And I'm doing that because A, it gives me newsletter access. B, it's cost effective for me in a way that my website is not. And so my website, john-huff.com, is going to come down. I'm going to let that go because I just don't want to pay for it for another year. Because when I launched it for the first tour blog, which was 2017. So it's been like 9 years. And at the time, life was different. It was serving me in different ways. And so the website made sense. It makes less sense now. So I'm going to let that go. I'm migrating to Substack. I'm still unlocking what Substack can do in terms of having merch, in terms of what I can post there. But that's going to be, for a while at least, the central hub of Semi-Eloquent Online. And so please do go there and sign up for free to my Substack. Eventually, I may have paid subscriptions, something like Patreon, where out of the goodness of your heart, you can support the show. I would greatly appreciate it if you did. We're not going to do that for the moment. And there will always be a free section. It's just a voluntary if you want to send a little bit, the price of a cup of coffee my way once a month. We'll get there in time. So I'm shifting to Substack. Please join me there. I'm going to be writing on there. And it's interesting because I feel kind of a sense of freedom, kind of a sense of relief from letting the website go. I've been holding on to it for many years without actually using it for all that much. And it's just sort of been sitting there as kind of a dead resource. Not a lot of visitors, not doing a lot for me, and costing me a fair amount of money, costing me a pretty penny. And so I'm letting it go. And it's interesting because once I've joined Substack, I've felt a little bit like writing. I'm not sure how I will use that platform. I can promise a weekly missive about that week's episode, but I'm also going to be using it to solicit feedback from you. one of the things I want to do on the show is begin to do segments. A few more segments. So I'm going to try doing question of the week. I'm going to try doing song of the week, something that gives this perhaps a little more structure than it's had in the past, and something that becomes hopefully more interactive for you, the listener. I always love getting questions. I always love getting inquiries from you, comments from you, stuff for me to turn around and use on the show to build this kind of relationship with you. And so I'm going to do a question of the week. I'm going to do a song of the week. And do I start that now? Because we're already getting to be quite long on this episode, rather unexpectedly. But let's try to build those segments in starting right now. Let's try to build those traditions in starting right now. And so I'll take a question of the week. And I actually do have one. I got a few good ones from our old pal Wolf, with whom I went to Pussifer a few weeks ago. And I can't do them all, but I can try to do quickly a couple of them. First question is, if you're thinking about starting a band, what's the best way to go about it? And the answer to that is, it kind of depends on where you're at. I started my first serious band, Hiroshima Hearts, which is like 15 years ago. That started because I, stop me if you've heard this, put myself out there as a drummer after, as you know, years of being terrified to do so. If you've been listening, you know that story. I didn't know anybody in the scene. Didn't know anybody in the scene at the time, and so I had to kind of cold call. So I put up an ad on Band Mix, which is dating for musicians, basically. Musicians wanted, bands looking, etc. And it's free. It's great. So I put up a profile on Band Mix, and in that process, I encountered a dude called Tyler, guitar player. Our musical interests were not identical, but they lined up in a way, and I just kind of liked the cut of his jib. And so I messaged him. I said, this is me. This is what I'm looking for. What do you think? He said, okay, sounds cool. Long story short, he showed up at my house with another dude I wasn't expecting called Mike. We had a jam in my basement, and from there, eventually was born Hiroshima Hearts. And when you're first starting, if you're new in a scene, chances are that's the way you got to do it. But if you're a musician, you probably also have a friend or two who are musicians, or people you know who know musicians. And so maybe it begins with that friend you have who plays bass. You're like, why don't we just have a jam? And the bass player comes over and whatever. You begin to get into that mode. Or your friend's a drummer, or your friend's brother is a drummer, and you connect that way and you have a jam. It just begins with a jam a lot of the time. Sometimes the jam goes somewhere, sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of times people are going to bail on your jam. I found that on Band Mix. We found that when Hearts was looking for a singer. Everybody wants to jam until it's jam day, and then they don't show up or they cancel. That's a weird phenomenon. Happens, don't get discouraged. But if you've been in the scene for a while, then you know everybody. And I play in a bunch of bands, and I play with a bunch of people, and I have played in a bunch of bands with a bunch of people, and that is purely networking. If you're in the scene, then you know other musicians, you meet other musicians, you play gigs with other musicians, and it becomes this situation where you just know people, or people hit you up like, hey, we played this show, we need somebody, or we're looking to start a new thing, are you interested? You just begin to build relationships, and from there it becomes very easy. It's like, I know tons of musicians. I got this idea for a project I want to do. I got an idea who I think would be great for that, and you can just begin to reach out. But it's harder when you're first starting. So put an ad online, put a profile on Bandmix, talk to people you know who play, and just start playing. Turn up at jams, turn up at open mics, turn up at open jams. Play with people, meet people. Music is very much a networking game. Music is very much a who you know game. And I toured 4 times in Europe with Sarah Smith because I knew Ken the Zen, and he recommended me for the job. And I met him playing with Carly, and it's all this web of who you know. I play with Fresh Breath because Ken and I met them playing with Sarah on a gig. And then fast forward, they need a rhythm section. They call Ken. He says, I'm in. Ken calls me. Hey, are you in? And away we go. I know and play with Kay Howell because of the same thing. In fact, the same show. Met them, met Fresh Breath, met Kay at the same gig. And then later, Kay and I are backing Sarah on a tour, and there it is. It's like it becomes this who you know game. So if you're in the system, if you're in the scene, it's very easy to start a band. It's not very easy to get it off the ground, but it's very easy to start it. If you're new to the scene, if you're moving to a new city, then talk to people you know who play, go out to open mics, go out to open jams, get an ad up online, and say yes to stuff. That's the other thing. Say yes to stuff, feel it out. You're not obligated to anything. If you really want to be in a band, you'll find your way into a band. And then if you start playing in your local scene, you'll probably have lots of opportunities to be in bands. Wolf had another question. What did you wish you knew that you know now after 15 years of music business experience? I don't have a lot to say about that in terms of the business. I didn't get into music for the business. It never occurred to me that I could make any money or try to make a living as a drummer. I just got in because I felt an intuition that says it's time to play music. And I thought I would have a band and I would play once in a while and that would be it. I didn't anticipate trying to be full-time. I didn't anticipate being a side player. I didn't anticipate touring. I didn't anticipate any of that. I just sort of started and then life unfolded. So what do I wish I knew about the business? Not much, because the business has never really been the focus for me. What I can say is that I wish I had known 15 years ago that the way I play is okay. That's the thing I wrestled with for probably 5, 6, 7 years of being a player is my playing okay? Is my approach to the drums okay? Is what I do good enough? Am I okay? And I didn't think so for a very long time, and it gave me gallbladder attacks. And it created difficult attachments to artists and attachments to status or what chair I had or whether I could keep it. It was this 6, 7 years of just sheer anxiety about whether I'm good enough, whether I'm okay. Well, the answer is, and always was, yeah. Doesn't mean I'm right for every band in every situation. What it does mean is that there are situations that I'm right for. There are artists I'm right for. There are things that I do really well. And instead of being focused on what I don't do well and feeling bad about that, I've had to learn to focus on what I do well, to take enormous confidence from that and to use that as my selling point. I play simply. I play restrained. I am a supporting character and I do it well in certain circumstances. And I wish I had known 15 years ago that that was the case, because it would have made a lot of what I went through learning that just a lot faster and just a lot easier. Like, this whole thing has been a game of developing my own confidence, developing my own belief in myself. I didn't have any at the start. I have some now. Would have been nice to have it then, but the reality is I wouldn't have done any of the growing that I've done if I was already there. So I treat my whole experience in music as just one giant self-growth, personal development crucible. And so it would have been nice to know 15 years ago that I was okay. But the process of discovering that, while extremely difficult and often painful, has been the reward. So that's my answer to those questions of the week from our friend Wolf. If you have a question of the week, hit me up on socials and ask it. And it can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about music. Doesn't have to be about podcasting. It can be literally anything. What's my favorite color? You can ask me anything you want, and it gives us something fun to explore on this show. Hit me up on socials, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and if you have questions, I would love to hear them. Before we go, real quick, I do need to give you some new music to listen to, and what I'm going to present is just a really banging new rock and roll tune by a band called Parker Barrow. And it would seem late to Parker Barrow because the video for their new song Blinded has over 300,000 views on YouTube already. Normally, I would not talk about a song that's that popular and has that much of a following. I like to push artists that aren't getting that kind of attention. But that's what jumped out at me this week. What is Parker Barrow? Well, it's a swampy southern rock band from the States. It's like, I think they are anywhere from a 6-piece to a 10-piece, depending on the gig. And they are fronted by a fantastic singer called Megan Kane. And this new song, Blinded, as usual, I like to go by the YouTube comments because these people are more informed than me. Somebody says of this song, it's as if Highway to Hell and All Right Now had a baby and Heart sang it. Do you hear the opening chords? This is a southern guitar rock band, man. Allman Brothers, Black Crowes, you know what I mean? One of those with this powerhouse female singer, Megan. The opening chords are AC/DC. It's like, what are we getting into here? Is this a cover? And then the first thought I had when the song really kicked in was Sass Jordan. And somebody else said, like a heavy Sass Jordan singing for AC/DC. Yeah, somebody else says, I believe the Robinson brothers would approve. That's, of course, the Black Crowes. And the band themselves describe themselves as blues-infused southern rock and roll, and it is exactly that. I thought Sass Jordan right off the bat, just a big guitar rock song with the similar kind of voice over top. Really slick, really fantastic, really cool. Also, gives me a chance to tell a little story. Why are they called Parker Barrow? Well, if you know your true crime, if you listen to those podcasts, you'll know that Parker and Barrow are the surnames of Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker, Clyde Barrow. And I don't have time to tell you the whole Bonnie and Clyde story, but you will know just from popular culture that they were outlaws, the Barrow Gang, back in the 30s, and they became as such kind of enormous celebrities during the Prohibition era, back when you had Al Capone and these sort of weird celebrated criminals in popular culture. And they were celebrities then because they went on a huge crime spree. And there appeared in newspapers a picture of Bonnie Parker in her early 20s holding a pistol and smoking a cigar. And they became national celebrities off of this picture, the Barrow Gang, Bonnie and Clyde. And there's this weird kind of retrospective glamour that became attached. There was the Bonnie and Clyde movie. There's been a few movies that are based on the Bonnie and Clyde story. And they became national celebrities, this weird glamour of Prohibition era gangs and crime. But the reality is they were horrendous. The Barrow Gang killed 12 people. 9 of them were cops. They robbed people. They beat people. They committed all kinds of armed robbery, murder. They were horrendous human beings. And people didn't seem to get that because the story was dangerous and glamorous and they were celebrities until it happened that the Barrow Gang ambushed 2 motorcycle cops outside of Grapevine, Texas, April 1st, 1934. And the public perception changed pretty radically, where it became real. Like, we hear about these people doing murders and armed robberies and whatever, and it all seems very exciting. And then it just kind of filtered out. These 2 motorcycle cops pulled over to help this stranded car. Bonnie and Clyde jumped out and murdered them both. And the Grapevine, Texas incident really turned the tide of public opinion. And it was not long after that, May 23rd, 1934, a special task force to get the Barrow Gang had been raised in Texas, I believe. And they themselves were eventually ambushed in much the same way. Car was pulled over on the side of the road. Bonnie and Clyde pulled up, probably to jack whoever it was that was in there. And when they pulled over, the posse jumped out and shot them. They each had, I don't know, there was like 117 bullets. They were each hit like 20 times. Very much deceased, Bonnie and Clyde. And I'll tell you a secret, kids, despite how awful they were, 20,000 people attended Bonnie Parker's funeral. That's this weird fascination, I suppose, that America has with outlaws and guns and violence. And I will refrain further commentary on that. And so Parker Barrow are named after Bonnie and Clyde. There you go. And I guess it's an homage to this Southern outlaw thing again. And take what you will from that. I'm taking from it that Blinded is just a really cool song. I talk a lot on here about shoegaze music. I talk about a lot of kind of moody indie rock, alt rock stuff. This is just a straight up Southern rock and roll banger. Reminds me of Sass Jordan. Reminds me a little bit of a heavier Melissa Etheridge. And if what you're jonesing for right now is just some straight up guitar rock and roll, Blinded by Parker Barrow will be put on the Reference on the Podcast 2026 playlist on Spotify. And if you sign up to my Substack newsletter, I'll send you the video myself. Gotta go. This is way too damn long. If you've hung this far, I want to thank you ever so much for doing so. Please, please, please consider a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. Haven't had one in a while. Would warm my cockles to see a couple. Please consider doing that. Does help me in the algorithm against all of these very, very heavily funded celebrity podcasts that seem to have taken over since the pandemic. I want to thank you for your support. I want to thank you for the encouragement and the shout outs. I want to remind you that good things happen when you put yourself out there, and good questions get answered when you send them to me. Please sign up for the Substack, buy a t-shirt, and no matter what, do take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon, kids.